Now, before we get into this, I'm just curious because I'm going to leave time at the end because I want to compare this to some other things that we've been reading in here so far. But we just came off of reading, Plato. We read also the main of Plato. Did it seem different reading Aristotle? How did it seem different? Who's saying that? Is that you?
Yeah.
How did it seem different?
I feel like in the analogy of cave, it's like the story doesn't really say how the people get released from the chain and got to see the world outside.
The narrative was incomplete for you. The story was incomplete.
Yeah. Oh. So it seems like in that analogy, the soul in that person doesn't have kind of doesn't make the people doesn't make that person to know what he actually wants. He's like being pushed by some other power like to discover the world outside.
Yeah.
Like here in this passage.
Yeah, they drug him out, right? Yeah. No, that's right. Anything else? I mean, just generally, did you feel like you kind of went from reading, something that's a little more poetic to something that's a little more mathematical? Did it seem like it was like, more like bam, 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 a little bit? Okay, so Aristotle's not an unfamiliar name to you, but we haven't yet delved into him in this course, so this is the beginning. We're going to talk more about this when we're done here. I just wanted to. It seems like it reads different, especially that section of the Anima. I just when I read through it again, I got the impression. I said, I bet you they're going to feel like they read something different. He'd ask different questions, and that's what we're going to do at the end, though. Okay. So, don't think philosophy. Just think of like in normal pedestrian terms. If somebody says something's got to change, or this changed, what does that usually mean to you? What do you think? It's different. Okay, so there's something that went on there. How does it change? Right? Like if something changes, how does it change?
You need evidence to prove it.
Evidence to prove it. Good for you. Okay.
How if it changes the better afterwards?
Okay, you're going to ask a lot of questions about that. Yeah, right. All these things. We don't always. Let's do this. Bring out a pencil. All right. So these means a little bit. I know this wasn't all in those not the first two chapters you read. But change and how you talk about something changing has a little different understanding for Aristotle, right? So he's almost asking like the why, why is this? Make it a different way. Let's start. This is a man-made thing, right? So this isn't going to be the same as you and I. But if I were to ask you like the why of this, in Aristotle's mind, I would start out by saying, what's the material of this? So what does that make of? I mean, just it's obvious. What does it make of? What is it? Wood. There's other stuff in there, right? Graphite. Very good. You didn't say lead, right? Maybe if you were another 30 years older, you'd be calling it a lead pencil, right? Has a rubber, ferrule and stuff, right? So that's part of the why of this, okay? Without that, this wouldn't be. If we were to say the efficient, that's who made it. Now, I can't read that. But whatever name was on that, what is that?
Yes.
Tychus. That's very good. I've never heard that before. That's the company, right? So we would call that the efficient cause, right? These are all causes, right? There's a material cause, an efficient cause. The formal cause is, somebody came up with this, right? I mean, maybe back in the day they would just scratch something on on the stones or such, but somebody said, hey, I got an idea, right? The ideal. And that's a little different. Like you were talking, Beijing, about Plato, his ideas were out there, right? And you had to go out to get to the reality of those ideas. This is a little different. Final cause is, what do we use this for? So this is to write, right? So, those would all be like the four ways he would say, when we're talking about things that are inanimate like this, we can still today come up with all the four causes. But nonetheless, we are not the same things, right? Like if you heard him talk about substances in this, really what he's talking about here are things like you and I, animals, right? So your cat, trees and such. And we don't really talk about those things in the same way with those causes, especially, in modern science. Like, we might talk about those 4 causes to a tree. We can probably get through the material cause, right? I mean, we would say it's wood. You can go down, if you start saying molecules and everything else, if you're that scientific person, he would still have something probably to say about that today. Those things still are material things. But nonetheless, we might talk about the material, we might even talk about the efficient. That we might have some arguments about, but we can at least investigate that, right? I mean, if you're a theistic evolutionist, you would say, well, there's some design that played out in evolution. And if you're a materialist, you would say, no, it was just, it was a random evolution. But nonetheless, you would have attempts to explain, right, like how these things came. The reason why I bring those 2 up is because those 2 things are pretty much exclusively what modern science is going to stick to. So I'm trying to make a distinction here. We're not always seeing causes in the same way. Now, when it comes to you and I, cats and trees, we're going to talk about the formal cause. But a final cause, how would you attribute a final cause to that? I mean, what is the absolute destination of a human being, right? Remember, I know we didn't talk about it in epistemology too much. Remember us mentioning Karl Popper and falsifiability, how empirical science, do you remember that? How would you ever falsify, what the absolute final use of the human person is, the tree? I know we can use a tree to cut wood and everything like that, but that's something else, right? We'd probably have the same thing with the formal, because we're going to see that as the essence of things. And how would we ever really do something with that? So, a little bit different. So when he starts talking about you and I, cats and trees, remember, this is the Anima, this is about the soul. He's going to be going there pretty quickly. He's going to be doing a little bit different than we experienced it with Plato. So let's see. Now, when you get to human persons, right, he says there's these 2 causes. He actually had listed 3, but remember he talked about he said there's the material, and there's the formal, and then there's the composite of the 2. Okay, so when we talk about the matter or the material, we're saying that's the body. Now, there's something different about this. Let's go back and think on Friday. I know that was 4 days ago now. What did Plato say in the Phaedo about how long the body lasts? Does anybody remember? The mummification analogy, yeah.
Right, so like, it's an already being part of the soul, so it's like every body that truly decomposes still lasts a fair amount of time if we modify it, it's like really long.
Yeah.
The soul should.
That's right. He was almost giving comfort, right?
Yeah.
Hey, look, if the beautiful body, which is, can deteriorate, takes that long, the soul. Okay, so it's sort of the same here too, but a little bit different when he's talking about here is that can change, right? So you and I, our bodies can deteriorate. It might take a long time, but it can deteriorate. The same thing with trees. They're not going to live forever, even if it rots and such, right? Plus, other things we can do. I mean, we could cut down a tree and burn it. We could get rid of the material aspect of the tree. So these things are there and they're important, but they're changeable. And when something's changeable, that's not going to really, it's going to unsettle their minds. Remember, that's what what did Plato, when he was making the argument about what cannot change, where did he eventually wind up with that? Anybody? The universals.
It's like if the soul is more like to than the universals, then.
Yeah, he compared the soul to the eternal.
Yeah.
And the eternal, he kind of combined that with
Divine.
the divine.
Yes, the divine can't change and the soul can't change. So
Absolutely. All right. So here, you don't have that luxury here, okay? I mean, there's going to be issues with this stuff changing. But that doesn't mean this isn't the other aspect of the composite human being. So if we only had the material, I mean, if we have a human being and there's only the material, we have force, right? There's nothing, inside. Well, I don't want to use that word inside. I'm going to start down Cartesian here. But this is the form. So this is the formal cause. So in the same way that, in Plato's allegory, like you said, Zhejiang, they had to drag the guy out. Out there were the true forms. Inside you saw the shadows, right? The same thing here. This is what, like, if you just think of the word anima. Does anybody know what that word means? Don't even bother asking me. What does anima mean? Anybody look it up? Are you curious? People wondering? What are we talking about here? It's on the soul, all right? So a soul animates something, you know. So in other words, it's the soul then that brings the form to the body, you know, and gives it life. So without these two things, you're not going to have a human person, right? Now we're just still here in this first chapter of the second book, right? And we'll do the first chapter and the second chapter and then move on. What about this? Is anything you didn't get about this so far? I mean, so far it's kind of straightforward. There's not a lot of things to investigate per se. Now, this is interesting. When you and I hear the word potential, you know, we think, well, it could be. You know, at least that's how I would always have thought before I studied philosophy. You know, so you have the potential to be a doctor, you have the potential to be an accountant, the potential to be a philosopher. So, but you have a lot of potential. That's how we would look, right? Well, in this way, the body, it's only as a material thing, it only has something that's potency. In other words, it really can. It's not going to be something other than it is without the form attached. So if you go from form as actual, material's potential, going from potential to actual just means that it becomes what it is intended. All right. Let's say it this way.
So like, so whatever is in this world is a potential of what it should be.
The forms are. Okay. Here, let me back up. This might be an easy way. Let me go into a natural thing, and then we'll come back to this. If I were to show you an acorn, okay, and I would say, what can this acorn potentially be? What would you say? A what? A tree. All right. Now, it's going to be an oak tree, right? I mean, the acorn has the potentiality to be an oak tree. When it becomes the oak tree, it's actual. Now, it doesn't have unlimited potentialities, right? It's not going to be a giraffe. It's not going to be something else because it has an essence to it, right? So when somebody says that it could potentially be a tree, we have to kind of click out of the way that we're thinking like, well, it could be something else too. Like that's one of its potentials. It's its only future. The acorn has no other future. Something could happen along the way, right? It could never fertilize, no squirrel grabs it and buries it. It gets just stepped on and such. But then it just ceases to exist. But its only potentiality is in the actuality of the tree. So we'd say it's potential at this point, and then it's actual here. He's trying to take these two causes and put them into the body and the soul, right? So the body, as the material cause, is always in potential. So, but it is only ready to receive the form, and then it becomes actual in that way. Does that kind of make sense? All right? Let me ask you something here, because we've been doing this different ways. How do you think Plato would have approached this? This would be a good time to do it. He's a little more systematic here, isn't he? Like if somebody walked up to you and said, I'm curious, is the soul the actual result of the material of the body, or is the body that of the soul? What would be like the first thing, just from you reading two things of Plato? What would he say? Remember how he asked? He would start to ask about the soul. He probably would stop the whole conversation, right? And start to say, well, I'm not quite sure yet. What exactly is this soul you're talking about? Is the soul one thing or is it many things? Remember, didn't you guys, I saw little complaints, right? When we read Plato, it's like, get to the point. Right? I mean, he'd really go around. Augustine, he'd be a little different. Like, what was the first 6 pages of the Soliloquy that we read? What did he do? Do you remember?
Right.
It was a prayer. If Augustine was going to start here, he'd probably start out with like a 6-page prayer. But he still followed the kind of same thinking, right? There's that dialectic that we read through the Soliloquy and then through Plato. This is a little bit more straightforward. He's just delivering it, all right? And he's going to admit that by the time he gets to the beginning of the second book. So anyway, maybe this will help. What did he say about the wax? What was the story that he had about the wax and the seal? Because at this point, he's starting to ask, are the body and soul one? And he's saying, well, what, is that a question? And should we be asking that kind of question? And then he says, well, what about the wax? Would he say the same thing about a wax? What did he say? Is my mic on up here?
Is it that one thing? What about the other thing?
Well, yeah, because he's starting to try to make a comparison about, okay, if we have the wax, and the wax is the material, right? And then we have the stamp, and the stamp is the form. What do we do with the stamp? We place it in. Once it's pushed into the wax, without that, the wax would not have the form. So whatever that thing is, it becomes a composite of those two. And he's saying it's sort of like the body. What about the axe? We'll do this a few things, so maybe in a few different ways, maybe you'll get it then. What does it say about the axe? What do you know? Like, does an axe chop on itself? If we're talking about if the soul animates something, right? If the soul is the form and that's what gives the thing its actuality, what does an axe do if it has nothing behind it? Nothing. Well then, who uses an axe? Okay.
Some person created the soul and the body.
The person, most be like he was making the comparison that the axe becomes like an organ, right? Like he's starting to talk about parts here. He said about the eyeball too, right? I mean, what did he say about the eyeball?
It was like if the eye was an animal, then like its whatness would be sight, because it doesn't actually have a function if it doesn't have sight.
That's right. And you would probably make the same sort of analogy with, like, say, the cameras on your computer and such, right? I mean, separate from these things, they simply don't share the same functionality as they are together, all right? So he talks about, like, is the eye is like an organ of the body, then the axe, analogously, would be like the organ of the lumberjack or the person or whatever. And then they would be the ones that drive it. So there's nothing there to animate it behind it. Do you kind of get that? All right. It seems to me like there's something more to be said there, but let's go on here. All right. Now, he's going to go back now, and he's going to start talking in a second. Well, actually, he begins the second one with the the equilateral rectangle. Anybody get his point to that? He wasn't making some deep, overarching analogy. In the beginning of that book, he's starting to talk about how really here he sort of asserted these things. You know, having given you the proofs for it and such. And he says, you know, we've got to get into it a little bit and see, you know, that what could it be without? In other words, we're going to say what it is, and we're going to say what it cannot be. All right, that type of thing anyway. So when he starts to talk about the soul, we're going to apply it to those three things that I have there, right? Now, with each of these, he's a little uncertain through here. Sometimes he calls them parts, sometimes he says, well, they're not really parts. But there's distinctions, right, between plants and animals, and then even humans and human animal. So what powers would the soul of the vegetative state have? Let's say that. What powers does a vegetable have, a plant and such? What does it do? Like if you have, it grows, right? It grows too by how does it, you know, it grows by pulling nutrition out of the ground and such. So it has those powers, right? So we'd say those are the vegetative powers of the soul in the plant. And we would say that there's something different, though, with animals. Like, forget about just jumping over to humans. But what would be the distinction between most animals and plants? Touch, right? Yep. Well, we're not, well, okay, the brain, but they would be probably talking about, like, certain primitive functions of it.
You said like thinking and motility.
Yep, there's motility, yeah, absolutely, they're mobile, right? So those things would exist in the soul as far as we're talking about the sensitive aspect of it, the sensitive powers, but not in the vegetative. Then he reserves something else then for the human being. What is that? What do we have that the plants and the animals do not have? At least according to this theory. Well, he's saying they all have souls. We'll talk about that in a sec. But our soul, in other words, he's talking about a rational soul being different. Well, we do have the power of rationality and such. They used to say that we had the power of risibility. Do you guys know what that word means? It wasn't in this reading. You know what risibility means? The ability to laugh, you know, to see something funny. But any of you see that video that's been around social media about a couple years ago, where there was this orangutan behind the glass and somebody did like the ball and the cup trick, and the orangutan saw it and started laughing and falling back. Anybody see that? You know, it makes you wonder, you know, how far we are on those things. Okay, but nonetheless, you know, these are the things then that would give actuality to the material of the plant. And whatever the material of the plant is, we'd say that's the matter, right? We would call it the body of the plant. And the same thing with the animals, and then the same thing with us. But these have a different thing. And what he means by it is all the phenomenon that occurs here, he says it's the soul that is actually is the actuality of this. Now here's something you could think ahead on, because it'll be a little while perhaps until we start talking all about Aquinas. I got to think. These vegetative and sensitive aspects, right? They're part of the material aspects of who we are as human beings. So it's because of our bodies that we can feel pain. Right? Let's forget about moral injuries and such that might be with the brain right now to keep it simple. But the growth and everything else, the nutrition, all those things, they're part of the material. When those things are gone, you can almost see why a lot within Christianity even grabbed this from Aristotle. They're saying the feelings of pain, suffering, those things are really attached to the body. But even Plato, remember how he was talking about how, the mind is close, well, you already said it, Carlos, the mind is closer to the divine, right? So those of you, there's a couple of you that wrote in your reflections about Plato's understanding of the reincarnation of souls and what comfort that might be, that some part of us goes on. But if we were just to follow that through in its thinking, what part of it here would continue? Think again. Think of the form and the internal unchanging. What part of this would continue after death? He's trying to make a case for the soul. Come on, this isn't easy. What part? What in the soul? What powers would be there that you would not lose? In other words, are you going to lose the sensitive aspects, vegetative aspects, or the rational aspects? Sensitive, right? So there's something else there. This stays as part of the body. So just as these two things come together, you have a composite. When they leave, no longer a composite.
So is the rational like the ability to think?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the ability to think, the ability to reason through things, the ability to be logical, the ability to ask questions, all that stuff would be aspects of the rational soul. Now, again, he doesn't work out in these first two chapters exactly how this exists within all of us. But we have all these things, don't we? I mean, you and I, we grow, we have nutrition that we can digest, we feel pain, there's sensitivity to us, but we also have the rational. His point is this: it all comes from the soul, right? So you talk about like the why of a thing, what caused the change, and we're pretty much just sticking here to the material and the formal. And he's saying the material, that's the thing that has the potential. But on its own, it's nothing. We can think in terms of the body, it's just a dead corpse, right? But with the form, that brings actuality. If you need to think in terms of it being animated, right? Now we have these powers of the souls that appear. So, everything what he's trying to say here is moving from potential to actual. I just wanted to make sure you didn't think like the potential meant like it could be something else in the future.
But then he said like the soul can't be within the body, so you can't put up with something.
Say that louder, I'm sorry. That's okay,
He's
there's air
saying
conditioning.
like the soul cannot be without the body. So does that mean like you can't be actual without like going through the potential?
Well, later on, he talks here about the fact that these things don't exist on their own in some sphere like it did for Plato, right? So these two things have to come together. So the stamp on its own really does not alter the form of itself until it can meet up to the matter. So we actually see the wax that has the seal put on it. So these two things together, as far as what he called, again, when he's talking about substances, he's talking about you and I. And he's talking about the cats. He's talking about the trees. He's not talking about something artificial like the pencil that I showed you here. So without one of these two things, right, if we're going to say like the why of the human person, what makes this human person, he said it's the composite of these two things. And then if you were to not have one of those, then you go right back to just with the body. And then we go back and talk about how we can Plato address that. What do you think? Give me questions about this before we just start doing discussion. We still got plenty of time. All right. Then let's be more. Oh, go ahead.
How is he so sure that the soul is not immortal?
Well, up to this point, he probably doesn't make the overall case for it.
Is It's just like, if, assuming that it does, this would be.
Yeah, he's, at this point, I wouldn't even think he's arguing for the eternal aspects of the soul. He's just talking about what the powers of the soul are. In other words, the body itself doesn't possess these qualities, all right? So until you have the soul, which is going to provide the vegetative, the sensitive, and such, those things, those phenomena, they appear through the soul.
But does he overall agree with like Socrates, where like he goes in a circle, like it's before and after?
No, because remember, why was Plato talking about that? Let's start there without going too deep into it. Like, why was it so important for that soul to pre-exist? What was he trying to prove? Remember what he did with the slave boy? Did anybody remember that?
Yeah.
What did he do with the slave boy?
Recollection of knowledge he's trying to prove.
Okay. So, if you remember what he did with the slave boy about, what was it, the swears, yeah. He didn't, all he did was ask him questions. So he's trying to say, how do you know? Well, you know because these things that exist, at least the soul has, existed prior. So Aristotle's not going to be making that same kind of claim. All right, so it's not important to him that he has that same understanding. We didn't get into how he understands epistemology. There's only so much we can cover, but it's going to be a little different. So he doesn't have the same goals per se. I want to ask you, what's your general impressions, though, of Aristotle over Plato? Let's do that. Besides the fact of the dialect, what do you think, Nicole?
He undermines Plato's theory on the separation of mind and body.
Okay.
Because
How do you think he does that?
He said the body and the soul works together as a.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. What did Plato think about, the senses and the world around us? How important was that to Plato? Do you remember? Nicole's like, you put me on the spot. Anybody want to jump in? You're going to see a little bit different here. I mean, Aristotle has different ideas about what the senses can offer, right?
Does Plato not trust the experience?
Well, pretty much, because remember what was the experience of the individual when he was released from the cave in the allegory? When he wasn't outside yet, but he was released and he looked around and went, oh, holy crap, this is all fire and things going across. What was Plato trying to do with that? Do you remember?
Our senses can trick us.
Yeah. In other words, what did he call them? They were really just shadows, right? So it isn't like he's just like outright denying this, but not quite sure about this. So I think you're right. It's okay to say, he was just a little, cautious with all of that. Aristotle's not so much, right? But you notice too, like, do you guys know the difference between deductive and inductive thinking? What do you think? Which one would match this?
No, this is
Oh, go ahead. Tell me what it is then.
He used premises to get to the conclusion.
Okay.
Inductive would be like, you use, you base your conclusion on past evidence.
Okay, an observation or something.
Yeah, so like if I know, I would say the grass is green because all every time I see grass is green. So
Absolutely.
I can believe that tomorrow the grass will be green.
So you're going from like the specific to the general, right? Which is probably more like Plato, right? I mean, Socrates, at least in Plato, right? He was asking, specific questions. This guy, he's starting pretty wide, right? And he's coming in. So it's a little different approach, too. And the dialectic, I mean, you don't see it, as apparent here, do you? I mean, first of all, we're not even having the conversation. Okay, so we had a conversation in the Meno, between Meno and Plato. What was the conversation? Do you remember what it was in the Soliloquies? I know he was talking to himself, but what were the two characters?
Augustine and Reason.
Augustine and Reason, right? So it was almost like he laid it out, almost like we're just going to go back and forth, right, in a series of questions, and they keep trying to dwindle it down. He's starting here, he's a little more systematic and logical coming through, right? So it's a little different experience for you to read. Okay, some of you did your papers on Lorraine Code. What would she say to Aristotle? You would say it has some bearing.
Like your soul may be different, like the way it thinks.
Okay.
How the way you obtain knowledge, kind of.
Okay. All right. What else would she say? Because she was kind of critical about a few things, and a couple of you that wrote about it in your paper, You laid it out. What would she say about his method of trying to come to a conclusion like this? What was her overall critique of who the knower was? Do you remember? It was a male, or at the very least, it was a generic male, right? You know, so there was some underlying assumptions. You guys are asleep today. This is Friday, isn't it? Is it like fall or something? I mean, I was the one that thought it was Halloween last weekend, so I'm the one I literally did, Dr. Schultz. I thought last weekend was Halloween, and they thought I was having a stroke up here. But nonetheless, she has something to say about this, though, right? We'll come back to that. What about those guys? What was their understanding of the world?
Sounds like everything happened for a reason.
Well, sort of. I mean, did they? I don't remember. Did they say that exactly in there, or was that just something you gleaned
Well,
out?
I know Jim was talking about like going to the
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Like an ethical maturity, I think they used the word. What else?
I know that weren't they saying that they had like they knew they didn't have a complete understanding and kind of in some way just let things sit for what they didn't know and try to learn kind of from the experiences around them.
Okay. Okay, we can come back to that too.
Like the Western world sort of just assumes that they have absolute truth, and that like sort of does not fixate on that and actually like appreciate how like the American culture, epistemology, and this is like this sort of
Yeah, because they appreciate what? I mean, there's something experience, right? Would they be suspect of this, do you think? Or maybe they, hey, let me ask you it this way. If we were to talk about, let's say it this way, if we were to call this the map and the human person the territory, what do you think they'd have to say about that? Remember their analogy about the map and the territory? Let's work there first. What was that about? Does anybody remember? I think this was going to be on the midterm. You guys better know this.
basically they're saying like our map and territory would be different than the American map and territory because like we have two different perspectives.
Okay, that's one aspect of it.
It's kind of like we assume that our maps and territories like match up and that we know all the twists and turns, while like Native American epistemology assumes that their map is just a general idea and that there's still more that there is to understand.
Okay, very good. Carlos, you have something to add? You're gonna reiterate that? You know that there's like this one-to-one thing that matched up, right? So, like, remember what they said? They thought the Europeans thought if they had the map, they had an understanding. Right? Maybe that'd be their critique here. You know, you guys are trying to map out the human person, you're trying to map out the soul. What makes you think that makes you understand that? You know, do you remember what the Native American epistemology had to do about? Remember the ethical maturity? They were saying, you guys think you know the truth, but. You remember that? What was that? You know the truth, but. See, now we're going back 2 weeks, maybe.
Was this like the machine analogy thing? Like we can beat knowledge out of anything, kind of, and like work out like a machine?
Well, that was one. That was good. I wasn't thinking of that, but that's good, right? So it's almost like you can use that as a form of domination. Like if you think you're so smart, well, anybody can just, you know, figure that machine out and stuff. But a little bit different when you're trying to talk about us as human persons and such, you know. But they'd have something to say about this because, well, let me ask you this: if you wanted to join the Creek tribe, when they asked the medicine man, how do you become a Creek? What do you do? Remember that? Smoke the pipe. What else? Come live with us for 4 years. Dance with us. Smoke our pipe. You remember, like, see, here's the problem. You know, those of us that are more rational, Eurocentric, we like, you know, how clear this is. And it does line up. I mean, even if it didn't come across you like that, this is very systematic, you know, but they're much more comfortable, like you had said, with the experience and such. And sometimes they don't line up. So, you know, they, like, if we threw an anomaly in here, something that said, hey, well, what about this? It could throw the whole thing off. But if we threw an anomaly in Native American epistemology, at least according to Cheney and Hester, what would they say? What do you think they would say? I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, generic anomaly. Would they discard it, or they embrace it? And they'd embrace it, and they'd almost like assimilate it in and say, I wonder how this fits into what we have now, right? It'd be a little different.
Would they take more into consideration like other things like previous existence of the soul? Like just like of everything.
You
rather
mean
than
Hester and
focusing
Cheney?
in- Yeah.
Well, I think that would be part of the understanding. I'm not an expert in
Yeah.
that, or in, Native American life, but I think they would bring all that to the experience. And they probably would have something to say as like, why do you think you have it figured out like this? They're a little more, like somebody said here, they're a little more comfortable with like letting it hang, right? And the problem is, remember how even Code had said that some people thought that she was going to then turn to be relativistic. That was still one of the fears with Native American epistemology. Like, you leave it all into experience and such. Maybe they'll just wind up being relativistic. But I think, the fact that the way they said, if you want to be Creek, come with us for 4 years, it wasn't like taking somebody out of the street and asking them what they thought. It's almost like join us, become one of us. It's more like thinking in a community than it was thinking separately. It's something like that. So a little different. What about those guys? What did they talk about? Well, I know you know what they talked about, because half of you guys wrote your paper on this. You're allowed to say the word. Come on. Does it look like bullshit? What do you think they'd have? I mean, you guys didn't read Frankfurt correctly, right? So we read through Wakem. And Wakem was more like a social epistemology, right? It's almost like, how does this fit in our role? Let me ask this a different way. I'm not asking you to critique Aristotle and asking whether or not he was saying bullshit. That's not where I'm going with this. Some of you put in your papers, and some of you, I thought this was pretty good. Even you talked about it like just in our dialectic we had over this. You go back home for Thanksgiving, and you try to get some of this, but you're not getting it all right. What do you think Wakem would say about you? And how would he articulate it? What do you think?
Just like pushing someone to sound better than you actually are. You're just like feeding them like false information that is not completely correct.
Okay. What else? You're getting ready to say something. I can feel it. What's the difference between that and lying? Was there a difference between that and lying?
Well, bullshit's almost like worse because when you're saying like a flat out lie, you're not like twisting the truth. You're just like you're lying. Like bullshit, like you're tricking someone into believing that that's like what is true. I guess so it's like worse than lying.
Okay. Somebody else wrote the opposite. Somebody else wrote they thought that was wrong. They thought that outright lying was worse than, wrapping it all in a colorful ribbon or something. What do you think? You guys are dead. What is going on? Gotta be the weather. What do you think?
I feel like it's worse than lying just because you're just like disguising it as something that you're pretending is true. It's not like there's like any indication that it's just an outright lie. It's just like kind of telling the truth, kind of not, trying to trick everyone else into thinking either like you're smarter than you think you are or that you just know what you're talking about when you know. Like it just depends.
Okay.
I don't know if I know if it's like worse than lying, because like with the Thanksgiving example, if you're trying to explain this to your family at home and you like miss some parts, like that kind of happens with socially facilitated knowledge. Like you're not gonna have like a perfect memory with everything. It's like
What if they're really impressed with your
your
big course at Villanova? We can't believe you're learning all of this. So keep going.
No, exactly, and you can't you're not trying to lie to them. You're just trying to give them information, but sometimes that goes wrong in a way. So you're not intentionally trying to deceive people. But if you get some facts wrong here and there, I don't think it's worse than lying.
Sometimes you intentionally do just the day avoid judgment. I don't think there's a sound promotes a issue. So
Oh, yeah, okay, it's accepted, cool.
Sometimes when you're bullshitting, you might consider yourself in a higher position, like you know more than other people, so you just put your opinions on others.
Okay, okay, good. Okay, now listen, with this, on Friday you have your midterm. Now, Wakeham talked about this in that article. I won't ask you questions on this, but I'll ask you questions on Plato and some of the other materials that we went through, Descartes and such. And if you don't really know what the answer is, Wakeham says as a student, you're going to bullshit. But there's a good and bad part to that, though, isn't there? Like, what would be the bad part? Or I don't care which one you pick. Because what he talked about plagiarism, right? Or not plagiarism, per se. He talked about when people try their best to sound intelligent in their papers or say what the professor wants to hear. And he called that bullshit. But he also had a caveat to it, right? He said, yeah, but. What was his yeah, but? Do you remember? Anybody? Sending it back to your notes.
Wasn't he saying that like it wasn't like with bad intentions or anything, but was trying to like imply the knowledge of the thing?
And he said they might just do that accidentally. Right? In other words, they might think that they're just bullshitting, putting it all down. Somebody might think that, like, in other words, maybe you don't agree with. And remember, I kept telling you, I'm trying to explain what these thinkers thought. Trying to sell, at least from their position. I wasn't necessarily saying that this is exactly how things are, just to help you understand it. But if I ask you to give that back to me, right, and synthesize the material, and you're trying to put it together, you might be thinking to yourself, I'm just bullshitting, because I don't believe this. But you're doing what I'm asking you. I'm not asking you to assent to it as a truth, right? I'm asking you to understand it. So there's that sense behind there too, right? Okay. Now, we've gotten a little bit away from these causes and changes in the souls and the source. The next class, we're going to be talking about, what are we reading? Chapters 3 and 4, I think, of such as this. What else, though, for the good of the cause? What I want to do is, let's see, we don't have a clock in this room. We still have about 5 minutes or so. How about, let's say if you want to stick around after here, what I want to do is, first of all, the 3 people that are taking the midterm on Wednesday, right? Let me talk to you real quick. And then we also have to start thinking a little bit about, let's see. No, we'll leave it at that. Leave it at that. What questions do you have on this? Anything? Okay. All right. We're going to cut out a little early then. So then let's do this. The 3 of you, though, let me just see you real quick so we can talk about this on Wednesday.